Hello, I'm Elizabeth Barry. Welcome to the Kind Communicator course. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to go beyond the ego. And how did I come up with this phrase? Where did it come from? Going beyond the ego is absolutely 100% walking a path of kindness, because if you're not kind, you're behind. You see, going beyond the ego brings you to this place of humility and humanity to hold vulnerability in your heart. Now, that might be a little bit of a tough phrase for many of us. Being vulnerable means being open. It means being susceptible to pain, and obstacles may seep into our veins and arteries. And oh, goodness gracious, if we get hurt. So what we do is we put up a front. We surround ourselves with the armor of the ego, and from there it creates this imbalance. So how do we get into balance? Well, let's talk a little bit about vulnerability, because I think that when you go beyond the ego, you have to tap into that vulnerability, that humility, that, oh, I'm going to own my dark sideness, right? So if you could just do me a favor, we're going to play with our bodies a little bit in all of these courses. You can just tape your elbows to your rib cage, and again, plant your feet towards the floor. Lengthen the spine, sit into the sits bones, and just feel your collarbones opening. Shoulders run down the back, and just put your hands out almost as if you're a scale, right? You're a weight scale. What are we weighing today? Well, we're weighing vulnerability. This is the vulnerability scale, where your goodness is in one hand and your not so goodness is in another. Your insecurity is over here, but then your courage is over here. Your value is here, but your laziness is over here, right? Each side is good and bad. And each and every day, there's going to be a shifting and a tipping. And when we truly own vulnerability, we're able to step beyond the ego. When we truly own vulnerability, we're going to be more comfortable with the tipping, right? We're going to be more comfortable with being a little lazy on some days, but knowing that we have value, so we can just come and tip back up, right? So you can just shake the arms out. That's okay. Thank you for participating with me. So that's a little bit about how I love to describe vulnerability. It's almost as if you're standing on a mountain with your hands on your hips, and you have this imaginary human cape on to say, I am committed, I am courage, I am bravery, I am all the good things and all the strengths that you see, but yet the wind is beating at your face and there's rain coming down on your head, but there's a smile as well. And then the sun comes out, right? So there's this consistent balance, this consistency of inconsistency, where your goodness and not so goodness are always going to be a part of you. You see, that's the part of the ego, that the ego never goes away, right? When we talk about ego, we're thinking about communication and being a kind communicator. It's like distorting the message. The ego will always come in to distort the message, because the ego puts up the front. The ability to go beyond the ego is to become happier. It's like a paradigm shift. Now, how do we get to that? Well, I actually got the idea of going beyond ego, and I named my Facebook group Beyond Ego and my podcast Beyond Ego. And the platform is housed in all of my books and in my work. But I got the idea from Dr. Seuss. And the way that I got the idea from Dr. Seuss was that I was reading this book, and I don't have children, but I love how Dr. Seuss brings out the spirit and the creativity and the innovation and the imagination and the pioneering of new ideas. Where there's nothing, there can be something big. And Dr. Seuss told his readers that everyone stops at Z, but not me. And in this book, he relates the letter Z in the alphabet as a place where we all stop. There's 26 letters. We go from A to Z, but from there we stop, and there's this like a wall up where we can't do anything. And Dr. Seuss tells this beautiful story, and he creates all of these words and phrases and sayings. And there's all of these happy little creatures inside of the book when they go beyond the letter Z. So I thought to myself, because I love to bring out the spirit in adults, what if I could talk to adults about going beyond their ego in the same way that Dr. Seuss addresses children to keep their curiosity high, to keep their imaginations opening like a spring, like a fountain, continuously sourcing new energy, new vibes, new creation of waves and water that just lifts us and keeps us floating, right? So I created Beyond Ego to teach adults that we can go beyond the letter Z, and perhaps the letter Z is our ego. Perhaps the letter Z is our boundary and our armor to say we're fine, but we're really not. You see, this is a delicate subject for most adults because a lot of us have anxiety about being our true selves. A lot of us have anxiety about who we are versus who we think we ought to be to someone else, to your job, to your boss, to your lover, to society, right? And a lot of us, we get into our 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, and we think that this is who we are. We can't change. This is who we are. We're that person that stands with our hands folded at the door, or we have both of our arms in the vestibule, and we've always done things this way. You know, you know what happens to the people that says we've always done things this way? They rot. They stay the same. There's no change. There's no innovation. There's no curiosity. There's like a wilting in the soul. There's that steadiness, that stubbornness, that gruffness. Remember when we started with the idea of the kindness innovation and coming into this course, we talked about being the lotus flower that opens in the heart, that lives in the muck, yet it still blooms. So this is what it's like to go beyond the ego. This is what it's like to be that scale of vulnerability where we're okay with the tipping of good and bad. The real you lives beyond the ego. You absolutely can change at any age. I am living proof. That's why I wrote this course. That's why I write my books. And that's why I'm an executive coach that teaches so many people about quality of life. You see, there's nothing to lose and everything to gain from owning and looking at your dark sides and your egoic ways. And it's almost as if it's like a healing, right? It's almost as if there's possibility and purpose and worthiness just waiting to enter our lives once we break down the barriers and once we stop putting up that force. You know, when I speak on stages, one of the comments that I get consistently is that she brought my walls down. Right? Everybody says that I have this capacity when I host events or when I curate events to bring people's walls down. What they really mean by that saying is that their ego has shifted from who they have to be in the audience to comfortable with raising their hand and asking questions, comfortable with saying, I'm not good at this, comfortable with saying that they need help with something. You see, you move with more love and grace, and truth and awareness is able to enter into your life when you let go, when your walls come down, i.e., in other words, aka going beyond the ego. You see, our actions have consequences, but the world answers. And if you want to hear the world, if you want to see what the answers are, we're constantly saying, dear universe, spirit, whatever, whoever we relate to in the higher realm and the divine consciousness of being, can you please give me an answer? But most of us are too rushed, too loud, too stubborn with our hands at the door saying we've always done things this way. But the world is answering us. But when we have to be quiet, we get the courage. We have to encourage the mind to be still. Instead of believing in these BS stories, instead of believing in our own BS and the stories that we tell ourselves, and perhaps we tell other people too on repeat, like a record player that's just consistently going, this happened to me, I believe in this, this is not good, this is not good, this is not good. It's almost as if you're on the treadmill of deceit of the ego, right? So a true training of the kindness innovation and the kind communicator is taking place here in this course. There's this true understanding of the moment, this true patience and preciousness of the present, not getting caught up in life's complexities or the ego's lies that say you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not skinny enough, You're not this enough. You need to get that certificate. You need to do this. You need to be this. You need to look a certain way. You need to speak a certain way. And yes, we're talking about speaking in certain ways here, but that's in a level of kindness and in a level of showing up with character. But when we have this measuring stick, maybe it's something that the ego has forced upon us. Maybe it's something that the ego has said, here's your measuring stick. You can go from here to here, from A to Z. Like Dr. Seuss said, you can go beyond the letter Z. Everyone stops at Z, but not me. You see? There's so much more to life than that measuring stick. Throw the measuring stick out the window. There's so much more to life than stress. If you run after too much, if you're trying too hard, we know, if you're trying and running and doing and just falling all of the time, there's no time for bliss and so much more time for stress and anxiety. That vulnerability exercise, when you take your elbows and grip them at your rib cage, this is like the reciprocity of balance, right? The goodness and the badness. We're gonna have weak sides. That's vulnerability. Owning it takes a heck of a lot of courage to say, I need help and I'm not perfect. But the only thing that tells us to be perfect is the ego and or society. We're all here on this earth to learn. I'll ask you, can you be an example of yourself? Can you be the highest example of yourself? Because everything's going to come to us in both pleasure and in pain. And when we go beyond the ego, we don't have to force, we don't have to judge, we don't have to command or demand control. We can practice freedom and liberation, stillness in the heart and the mind and the spirit and the voice, and listening, leaving the distractions of the mind that the ego forces upon us, tells us in whispers, those lies. Can we rest in stillness? See, that's what going beyond the ego means. And it doesn't mean that the ego goes away. The ego never goes away. It's always going to be there. That's why personal and professional development, self-development is almost as if it's like a lifelong journey, right? It helps you channel in all of the stuff that you need to learn. And when you're open and ready, when you bloom like a lotus flower, you become a more supportive person towards your self-care, towards your self-worth, towards your confidence and your self-esteem, and your personality shines rather than dulls. Right? Instead of this sense of emptiness and separation and anxiety, we have this light. You're like a lighthouse that's connected to the rocks that end into the oceans and just flow, connected to so much more than we know. It's like this truth that's steady like the lighthouse, this truth versus the ignorance of the ego that forces you to believe that there's disassociation. Attachments can fall apart. You absolutely can change. We're all breathing the same air. We're going to breathe a lot in this course, and there's going to be many times. In fact, let's do it right now. Let's just again take our place, feet planted on the floor, sitting onto the sits bones, lengthen the spine, open the collarbone, shoulders run down the back, smile on your face if you so choose. And let's cycle our breaths together. Take an inhale here. Big inhale. Pause at the top. Pause, pause, pause. And exhale like a lion out the mouth. I'm going to ask you to pause at the top of your breath, and perhaps sometimes at the bottom of your breath throughout these courses in the Kind Communicator course. You see that pause at the top, that's the stillness that I'm talking about. That's the connection. That's the present moment. The stillness of the pause teaches the body, the physiology of the body, non-attachment. Don't hold on to the breath, but hold on to it and see how it feels, and then you let it go. Right? This consistent evolution of breath teaches us that suffering can be avoided. There's a lot of purpose in breathing. There's purpose in a calm and still mind. And when you do this persistently, when you walk the talk of going beyond the ego, it becomes second nature. You don't forget it. You start to develop it as a lifestyle, as a ritual, as a choice. And in the face of change, your equilibrium is happy and free and steady like a lighthouse connected to the rocks that extend into the oceans, and you're okay with the tipping, right? You're okay with the tipping. You're honest with yourself, right? This is a beautiful way to be. This is the kindness innovation, the kind communicator way of being. And I usually call my on beyonders are the people who are the folks that are tapping into this beyond ego mindset, right? This communication innovation. On beyonders is your new name. You can call yourself an on beyonder now. You have confidence, you're accountable, you see a new meaning for the world, you see change in yourself, you see the opportunity and the possibility to change your behaviors and your patterns. You're willing to look within yourself and to be okay with it, and to not have so much worry or anxiety about what is, or about the BS stories that you're telling yourself, because you know that fear flows in them. What's beyond is beautiful. What's beyond the ego is beautiful. A to Z is here, but beyond that, there's so much more possibility. Never be shackled to your past. Never be shackled to that measuring stick that says, okay, be in between here and nothing in between. That gives you no room for breath. And the breath is going to continue to cycle that kindness in your life to achieve the clarity that you so desire, to handle people with kindness, to handle yourself with courage, and to communicate from a powerful place, to navigate the complexities of other people that you're surrounded by with poise and grace and leadership that you might not have been able to do before this course. You might not have been able to handle the difficulties of reactive people. Heck, you might be one of them. See, becoming comfortable with speaking up, becoming comfortable with owning our ego, will help you evolve into a kinder human being. It's this ego tells us that we're separate, right? It's this separateness from our source. Your source is your spirit. Your source is that within it. You're operating on the inside from the heart. When you speak from the heart, not from the head, you operate from this source that is separate from the illusion and the deceit of the ego. You're aware, you're present, you're patient, you're kind. You know, the ego is so very remote, but you're here right now. This is the kindness innovation. This is all about connectivity and the joy of being oneness, being with your breath, being you, the quirkiness of you, right? Going back to Dr. Seuss and all of his wonders of teaching us curiosity. I'm going to leave you with this thought, because I love to bring nature into everything that we do. Maybe pretend that you're a turtle right now. This beautiful turtle on the Galapagos Islands. You have your shell, right? We're talking about the ego having such a hard shell. You don't have to have your head inside of your shell. You know, a turtle can pop their head out and have their little hands. They can come out, right? They don't have to hide in the shell. Don't hide in the shell of your ego. Let your head out. Let your heart out. See from the heart, speak from the heart. You see, turtles represent strength and steadiness. And I can relate that to your breath. Can your body be still? You know, turtles can sit still for long periods of time. Their spirit animal teaches us to be steady, to have that character trait of liberation and freedom and sensing the nowness and focus and concentration. Focus and concentration helps you remain away from the ego because you're in the moment. The ego is addicted to rushing. The ego is addicted to go, go, go. The ego is addicted to I'm so busy. The ego is addicted to being who you think you ought to be to everyone else. But the problem with that is that you're going to look back on your life a few years down the road and you're going to say, I regret not slowing down, being present with my lover, with my family, with my job, with my passions and hobbies. I want you to be connected to source. not connected to the measuring stick. Think about going beyond who you think you ought to be and stepping into this connectedness. And again, maybe this connectedness doesn't have to do with anybody else right now other than yourself, other than your source and your being what I call an on beyonder right now, who is confident, accountable, responsible, excited about innovation. You're an on beyonder now. What can you say for yourself? How do you feel owning all of this goodness and weakness at the same time and being comfortable with that tipping? Because the more that you can make that a second nature with yourself, the more you're going to love yourself and like yourself just a little bit more. And that's where your courage, your confidence, and your self-esteem truly shines. I hope that you enjoyed this Beyond Ego course. You're now an On Beyonder. Welcome to the next step in the Kind Communicator course.